we would just by right give you 25% under Section 18, with the results being a higher income stream. We found that it was fairly successful, but a lot of housing authorities felt that it didn't quite get them where they needed to be. So we went back and we reviewed a lot of the applications that we did see and talked to some of our other housing authorities. And we're proud to bring you PIH Notice 2021-07, which now expands these blends. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Again, the major goal of this is to preserve and recapitalize more public housing assets and to provide robust resident rights to all of the residents, not breaking it out by RAD or Section 18. So, okay, by way of review, let's go ahead, next slide. What is Section 18? So Section 18 is Section 18 of the 1937 Housing Act, which authorizes the demolition and disposition of public housing. It requires, so again, we've outlined all the requirements in 2021-07, and you have to have a good justification under Section 18. These are the ones that we've got listed are the ones that we typically use. Physically obsolete. It's located in an area that poses a health and safety risk to the residents. Things like, oh, it just got hit by a hurricane, or it's on a Superfund site. Those have been the reasons we've taken them out for health and safety. Scattered sites, 4 units or less on non-contiguous sites. We can take those out. PHA that only owns 50 units or less can come in and get vouchers and convert to vouchers if they want. If the plan allows for efficient and effective units, you can do that too, but know that we only give you 25% of occupied units as TPV awards, for your TPV awards on that, and then the RAD Section 18 blend. Okay, next slide. So with the Section 8 approval, you get project-based vouchers. And project-based vouchers can be used as a preservation and redevelopment tool. Again, we give you the number of vouchers necessary to for all occupied units within the last 24 months of SAC approval. So if a unit has been long-term vacant, we cannot give it a voucher. It only is units that have been occupied by assisted families within 24 months of SAC approval. So you should look at that pretty heavily. Under Section 18, you can project-base these vouchers without tenant consent. The contract rent is set at a reasonable rent, so market rate, not to exceed 110% of the fair market rent. And under the HOTMA rules, they're exempt from things as long as it's originally public housing property that the public housing authority still has an interest in. They're exempt from competitive selection, the income mixing rules. In other words, that only 25% of the building can be project-based. That does not apply in these situations. And the PHA has a overall program cap of 20%, does not apply, again, if it's former public housing and the public housing authority still has an interest. Okay. I'm going to turn over to Will for a second.
Thanks. So, and then just to finish up the background, what's RAD? So RAD converts public housing properties to a Section 8 HAP contract, either to a project-based voucher HAP contract or to a project-based rental assistance contract. The main features of RAD, many of you are familiar, of course, are the Section 8 contract rents are based on public housing funding levels. So oftentimes that's below market. That's below what the standard Section 8 contract, a standard Section 8 contract might allow. We're currently basing rents based on fiscal year 2020. This will be in effect for the next 2 years for any CHAPs awarded or that are outstanding. Folks can use FY20 rents, which are, by the way, the strongest RAD rents we've ever had. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. The rents, once established, are then adjusted. These contract rents are adjusted by an inflator called the Ocaf for the term of the contract. Other key features of RAD. The long-term contracts must be renewed at each expiration, and we require a RAD use agreement at the site. RAD comes with some of the most robust resident rights of any program, including resident engagement and consultation requirements, the right of return and a prohibition against rescreening, the continuation of certain public housing rights like grievance termination procedures, as well as resident organizing rights, as well as a new choice mobility right to request a voucher after a year, or two if it's PPRA. RAD also requires that the property be retained under public or nonprofit ownership or control. And then RAD comes with a variety of flexibilities described in the RAD notice, including that PHAs can use public funds in the conversion, even though it's now becoming a Section 8 property, leaving the public housing program. The ability to move the assistance, transfer the assistance to new sites, neighborhoods, and other things. And the RAD requirements are in what we call the RAD notice, Housing Notice 2019-09, PIH 2019-23. Okay, so let's move on to the RAD Section 18 blends and go on to the next slide. There's two kinds of blends we're going to talk about, but they have certain common characteristics. PHAs can use, as Jane mentioned, PHAs can use RAD Section 18 together as described in this new PIH Notice 2020-107. And the reason we're bringing them together is to bring the best of both worlds. By blending RAD and Section 18, the Section 18 units that result in project-based vouchers often bring higher revenue than what could be available under RAD. That means the property can support greater financing and undertake greater improvements. So we're really optimistic that the expansion of these blends will provide a viable solution for a much larger portion of the public housing stock. With the blends, the robust RAD resident rights apply to the entire property, to all of the residents, regardless of whether their unit happens to be removed under RAD or Section 18. Doesn't make a difference. The residents are treated the same and maintain the same right of return and other rights. Similarly, the RAD requirements for one-for-one replacements apply. And we permit certain de minimis reductions, but for the most part, those are rarely used, and we have a one-for-one replacement requirement. PHAs can use public housing funds in the conversion because there's RAD at the property. And HUD is looking at the whole property holistically. We're not awkwardly segregating the RAD and Section 18 units. We're looking at the entire property as we're reviewing the request and underwriting and the entire thing at once. Okay, so let's now dive into the construction plan.
Hey, Will.
Under the, yes.
So your audio is a little choppy. It's like a little fuzzy. Sort of makes it hard to hear.
All right.
I don't know if you can.
Let me know. Is this better?
A little bit. Yeah. Let me try something again.
Okay. Let me try again.
Okay. Yeah, that's better. That's more clear.
That's better. Okay. I apologize, everyone. So there are two kinds of blends. The first blend that we're going to talk about is the RAD Section 18 construction blend, which replaces what had been called the 75-25 blend that Dean described earlier. Under this construction blend, HUD approves a portion of units under Section 18 to be replaced with project-based vouchers based on the level of rehab or construction that the PHA is achieving. The percent of units eligible for Section 18 disposition within the converting project is based on the hard construction cost proposed for the new construction or rehab of the covered project, compared with HUD's published housing construction costs, which is in the same TDC table, so total development construction cost table that HUD publishes each year. So this is summarized in this table. That if you are property is undergoing work that exceeds 30% of the HCC, the housing construction cost for its area, HUD will approve 20% of the units under Section 18. 80% will go RAD, and 20% will be approved under Section 18 and get replaced with project-based vouchers. If you're doing over 60% of work that exceeds 60% of HCC, housing construction costs, and HUD will approve 40% under Section 18. 60% will go through RAD. And then if you are doing over 90% of HCC, HUD will approve 60% under Section 18 and 40% of the units through RAD. And then there's a carve out there for high cost areas, certain high cost areas, where, again, if you're doing over 90% of HCC and in that high cost area, HUD will approve 80% of the units under Section 18 and 20% under RAD. Let's go to the next page where we have an example of this. So if a project's completing $50,000 per unit in rehab, which equates to 46% of HUD's published housing construction costs, in that market area, HUD will approve 20% of the public housing units. So in other words, that would fall within that first tier within these blends. Okay, a few notes on the Rad Section 18 construction blend that are on the next slide. First of all, to be eligible, this is really important, units must either be newly constructed or rehabbed without the use of 9% tax credits. This is meant to make more 4% deals work or deals without tax credits at all. So the property cannot be using 9% tax credits. The hard construction costs that or the construction costs of the project are evaluated based on what's submitted in the financing plan for RAD, and that includes not only the literal construction dollars, but also the general requirements, overhead and profit, and payment and performance bonds. And then lastly, high areas are defined in the notice as those where the HUD published HCC exceeds 120% of the national average. This covers 43 of 416 areas, metropolitan and non-metropolitan areas that are covered in the table. To help folks assess what blends they qualify for and whether they're in a high-cost area, we've got a couple of resources available. First, we've republished the workbook, the so-called workbook to test the HCC threshold, which can be used, which allows a PHA to enter in the information, the basic property information, and assess where it lands in terms of which blend it's eligible for. It also incorporates, it also will identify based on where you say the property is, whether it's in a high-cost area. But if you'd like to check separately, we've also published that list of high-cost areas that again covers 43 areas around the country. I think we'll now turn on to the small blend.
Okay, so this is the Rad Section 18. We had, as part of the Rad Notice 4, there was something called the Rad Closeout Blend, and this is where a PHA could, if they were looking to close out, use the 50 and under as part of a Rad deal. So in the new small blend, we're now saying for any housing authority with 250 units or fewer under its ACC, the PHA at their discretion can go up to 80% of the units in the converting to project will be converted under Section 18, and the remaining units, remaining 20%, would go as RAD. We can apply, the blend is applied at the project level, so it may be that you have 2 or 3 amps as part of that 250 units. As long as you can submit a repositioning plan that shows how all of the public housing units will be removed, we can move forward with a small closeout blend. Any TV contracts must be administered by a PHA operating at least 250 HCV units. So if you're a small PHA with a small HVC program, Housing Choice Voucher program, you'll need to find a partner that you can work with, and the field office can assist you with that to find an appropriate partner to work with. But you're going to need to get some help with that. Okay. We can go on now to recap the two blends.
So again, we've got a construction blend and a small PHA blend. The commonalities here is, in all cases, the Section 18 units must be replaced with project-based vouchers. This is a preservation tool. The RAD 1-for-1 replacement requirements apply. All residents receive the same robust RAD rights, and the PHA can contribute public housing funds into development. As you've seen, kind of pervades the two. The funds are only analyzed at the project level. So figuring out what % of units are eligible for Section 18, figuring out the construction or rehab costs, looking at the small PHA, applying the small PHA blends, it's all done at project by project level, which may mean an AMP, may mean part of an AMP, may mean units from multiple AMPs that are kind of reorganized together. Just like we commonly see in RAD, the flexibility around how PHA organizes the project.
So, and just I want to underline something that Will just said, that with the PHA can contribute public housing funds. I know a lot of PHAs that were looking at streamlined voluntary conversion were concerned about their reserves. Under this program, you can bring your reserves through. So I just want to highlight that for folks. Okay. Will, do you want me to take this, or you want to take it?
Oh, I'm sorry, Jane. I was talking on mute. So I'll kick it off. And then, so one of the nice things is that we, building off the success of pre-existing blends, the processing is fairly straightforward. That we created kind of a single point of contact where you work primarily with the Office of Recapitalization to evaluate the entire property, the entire transaction. So you start by applying for RAD for the entire project through the RAD resource desk. As you're putting together your capital needs assessment, environmental documents, you're doing that for the entire property. You'll eventually submit all that together in one financing plan. Any of the reviews that HUD has to do up front, so like the front-end civil rights reviews for construction or reductions in units or things like that, are done at the full project level. The PHA will be including both Section 18 and RAD in the PHA plan and in all consultation and meetings with residents. And then when they have their concept call with us, the RAD concept call, we identify that they intend to use the RAD and Section 18 blend, and then formally submitting that in the RAD financing plan. Again, the RAD financing plan would reflect the entire property, like capital needs assessment covering the entire property, not just the RAD units, a pro forma for the entire property, environmental review for the entire property. Next, please.
So again, we want to reiterate, there's one application, and that's through the RAD resource desk. There is no separate Section 18 application. There will be certain items needed in the financing plan. We will be posting FAQ shortly with that list of items that you need to include in the financing plan. Once we know exactly, which blend you're using, RECAP will revise the CHAP, and the SAC will create a separate Section 18 application. and we'll just pull the material straight off the RAD resource desk provided in the financing plan. Once the financing plan is approved, HUD will issue the RCC, and PIH's SAC will issue a Section 18 letter. So you'll get a separate letter from the SAC saying this is how many Tpvs you're eligible for and what the terms of those are and how to access them. You'll also get the RCC, which approves your financing plan and moves you to closing. The PHA applies. At that point, you will have what you need to apply for the tenant protection voucher funding. But it's not until you receive the SAC's letter can that application be completed. Okay. Next slide.
And just to reiterate, apply for the tenant protection vouchers as soon as you get that approval, because it does take HUD a few months to process the request. It doesn't happen automatically, so please make sure to apply for those right away. So you have your RCC, you've got your Section 18 approval, you're applying for tenant protection vouchers, and you're proceeding towards the closing. So at the closing, the following things are happening. You're actually disposing the property. Again, part of it is a Section 18 approval, Section 18 disposition approval, so there needs to be a disposition. That could be to an instrumentality or to an affiliate. That could be into a tax credit partnership. Lots of different models there. At closing, it'll be at the conversion, there'll be closing of any financing. HUD will release the DOT, the Declaration of Trust, for the entire property. We'll then record a RAD use agreement, as well as a rider to that RAD use agreement that covers the Section 18 units. And we'll be executing the RAD HAP contract, as well as the non-RAD project-based voucher HAP contract for the Section 18 units, which in many cases may be an AHAP. The agreement to enter into a HAP contract if the property is not eligible to be under a HAP contract right away. Okay. All right. So those are the blends. But before we go to questions, we want to cover just a few more points and take a step back and look at how these blends fit in with the rest of the tools available. So on the next slide, here's the menu right now. And this is really unprecedented times in terms of the tools that are available to public housing authorities to preserve or otherwise reposition public housing assets. We've got RAD, the standard RAD program, as well as a streamlined version for PHAs with 50 units or less. Section 18 and a number of criteria under which HUD will approve units under Section 18. Those units, those properties might be preserved eventually through project-based vouchers, or might be fully disposed of because they're in unsafe areas for other reasons. We've discussed, and on the right side you see we've discussed then today the new RAD Section 18 construction blend and RAD Section 18 small PHA blend. And then you still got streamlined voluntary conversion, which is primarily a tool for PHAs under 250 units. Got options to sell units to residents under a home ownership option. And then, of course, you've got choice neighborhoods for the redevelopment of large distressed public housing assets. How does this all fit together? Well, let's keep going. The tools break down somewhat by the size of the PHA. This graph shows that we have a little under 2,900 PHAs in this country. They operate 970,000 public housing units. But as you see in this graph, very small PHAs, there's 838 very small PHAs, that's PHAs under 50 units, and they control less 2.7% of the public housing stock. But another 1,360 PHAs own 17.3% of the public housing stock, and only 648 PHAs own a whopping 8% of public housing stock. So what we're trying to do here is create tools that meet the different needs of these PHAs, small, very small, and then the medium, large, which is, of course, also going to break down by urban, rural, suburban, et cetera. So looking then in turn by this dichotomy, we'll first turn to the very small and small PHAs.
So for very small PHAs, 50 units or less, obviously, you've got the Rad section, the Section 18, 50 units or less. If you have 50 units or less, you can come in, get vouchers, and that's enough. If you know today that if your voucher rents are higher than your Rad rents, that's probably a good option. You can do, if you know that your Rad rents are higher than your voucher rents, the streamlined Rad is also a very good option because it allows you to just take them out at your current PHA level, your public housing level, and allows you to maintain those units. You can do a blend, which is also available with the small PHA blend. If you have, let's say you have 40 units and 10 of them have been long-term vacant, you may want to consider a blend at that point. And then the streamlined voluntary conversion is also still available. As for the small PHA blends, the small PHAs, 51 units to 250 units, we highly recommend that you look at the Rad Section 18 small blend. The voluntary conversion is still available. You can do straight Rad. You can do Section 18, either obsolescence or scattered site, depending on what works for your portfolio. So you need to look at specific portfolios to determine what tool makes the most sense. But
Shannon, I think we need to work. I think the three biggest reasons we could think of why a PHA, these very small PHAs, the small size might take advantage of the small PHA blend is, one, it's built for preservation. It's built on the assumption of project basing, unlike, say, streamlined voluntary conversion. Two, PHA can bring public housing funds with it, so it doesn't have to try to spend down its funds prior to going through a Section 18 or voluntary conversion. So that's attractive to a lot of PHAs. And then three, the Rad resident rights. They don't have to kind of carve out solutions for certain residents who may be over income or for whatever reason otherwise wouldn't qualify to be admitted to the Section 8 program. So we've tried to make this really attractive with a pretty generous blend for these PHAs. So then moving on to, and Dan, did you have anything else to add? I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jean.
Cool.
So then moving on to the medium and large PHAs, which again are a small percentage of the overall number of housing authorities across the country, but own the vast majority of the stock. So for these PHAs, we've broken it down just as a framework for thinking about the tools available, broken it down by their properties. So you've got scattered sites, you've got properties with a range of rehab needs from moderate, substantial rehab, those that need to be redeveloped. And then there's properties that is called repositioning, where they're not going to continue to be used as affordable housing. Here we've tried to list the common tools, so the most likely tools. Of course, there's always going to be situations where another tool might be better, but these are really the main ones we see helping for these scenarios. So for scattered sites, the Section 18 provides a very useful tool to reposition scattered site units that are 4 units or less, buildings that are 4 units or less and non-continuous, which could result in preservation through a project-based voucher, or could be tenants. PIHs can now use Rad for scattered sites. PIHs can now use Rad Section 18 blends for scattered sites.
Hey, Will, your audio's breaking up pretty bad again. It's sort of hard to hear you.
Oh, sorry. Okay, let me try it.
I wonder if maybe...
I'll try calling in.
No, there's still some feedback in the back. Maybe try calling in, yeah.
All right, hold on a second.
Do you have any questions in the interim? We'll get reoriented.
Yeah, we can. That's a good idea, Jane. We can take some questions while he figures it out. Okay, so because we have had a good number come in, and thanks everybody for sending in your questions. We've got some good ones. So the first is, where can a PHA locate a list of which jurisdictions meet the 120% national average for HCC? If it has not yet been released, when can PHAs expect this?
I thought it was released. Yeah, in the PowerPoint that we just sent you, there's links. The workbook to test the HCC threshold, and then also the list of high-cost areas. So it's on the RAD resource desk, but there's a link, and it's in the PowerPoint under, I don't know what that slide number is. But,
okay. Great. And to the person who asked that question, if you don't have a copy of the PowerPoint, just make sure to reach out to me and I can give it to you. But it was in the email that was sent around this morning. So next question, if we have 2 amps and the rents are higher in amp 1 than amp 2, can we use the higher rents for both amps?
That's a good real question. You know what? Is Greg on here? Can he answer that? It's not.
Yes, I put Greg. Let me get him back. But I actually think I see Will connected on his phone. Hey, Will.
Yeah, I don't know. I was under the impression you could average them, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Greg, are you able to answer that one?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the question is, can you use which rents can you use? If they're talking about rent bundling, then clearly PHA can bundle between projects as long as the overall RAD rents don't exceed what it was, what the federal government was previously committing to the project. But the question is, can I use, if I'm going to go Section 18, what rents do I use? It really depends on project by project, because remember, every project is going to be under a blend. You're going to use, you're going to apply the appropriate test. Let's say the project was eligible for 80% Section 18, 80% of the units are eligible for Section 18, and they're going to get Tpvs. Then whatever the for that unit, for that property, whatever the project-based voucher rent rules are, which is for that specific property, the lesser of the rent requested by the owner, the reasonable rent, or 110% of the FMR. So you would apply that same formula on both sites to determine what those Section 8 rents would be.
Okay, great. We'll go to the next question. I'm not sure, with the blend, what if you were in a rural location where the market rate rents are lower? The blend then wouldn't necessarily help a project with greater financing to accomplish more rehab if the TPV rents are limited to rent reasonableness levels. What options are available for rural housing authorities wanting to utilize the blend and accomplish much needed higher levels of rehab?
Has Will joined yet?
I don't think so.
Okay, then I'll step in for him.
All right.
Yeah, one of the things we really strongly encourage all PHAs to do is to make sure that you understand what the rent rules are and you understand what the market rent for the property is going to be. And so even though you may be eligible for a blend, you could be in a market where the RAD rent is actually better. And if and so in that case, you might choose not to convert under the blends, but you might instead choose to do RAD, because the RAD rents may, by formula, be higher than what the FMRs are in your market, or at least the maximum rent that would be permissible under the PBV program. So yeah, it's really important to scope out. And clearly, PHAs, for example, in the coastal regions in the United States, the Mid-Atlantic, the Northeast, the Northwest, that those Section 8 rents are much higher than public housing funding. They tend to be. But that's not necessarily going to be the case in rural Arkansas or rural Nebraska, and you really have to know what your rents are, what your market rents are, to know which option is best for you financially.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Thanks, Jane. Will, I see you're back on. You want to get
Yes,
started?
Can you hear me?
Yep, yeah, that's good. That's really good.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so we talked about scattered sites, and then again, it shifts now to more conventional properties that require some level of rehab or redevelopment. And starting with properties with more modest levels of rehab, RAD continues to be a great tool. And now RAD, with the RAD Section 18 construction blends, particularly at that 30% of HCC level, that first tier for the construction blend, provides an opportunity for some additional revenue to get to some some of those properties on the higher end of those moderate needs. Then you've got properties with more substantial needs, and that's really the bread and butter of these RAD Section 18 construction blends. RAD's been really successful to date in giving PHAs testing the effectiveness of getting to a Section 8 contract and supporting significant financing. But we know there's lots of properties that have needs that exceed what the RAD rents can support in financing. And so these RAD Section 18 construction blends should go a substantial way in filling that gap. Then you've got properties that need to be redeveloped altogether, demolished and rebuilt. So again, the RAD Section 18 blends with the use of 4% tax credits becomes a really powerful tool. PHAs continue to use RAD 9% tax credits. PHAs the whole property might qualify for Section 18, and then of course, all choice neighborhoods can be layered on all of this to provide capital. And then finally, there are some properties PHAs know that strategically should not continue as affordable housing because of their location, because of health risks for residents, and what they're trying to do is actually move away from that property. PHAs can use Section 18 to do that, or they can use RAD or RAD Section 18 blends with a transfer of assistance, where they move the assistance to a better neighborhood and then dispose of the property. And then just two more notes on this. as these medium and large PHAs convert units through RAD or Section 18 or other tools and get down below 250 or below 50 units, and the small and very small PHA tools that Jane described on the prior slide become available as well. So they'd be eligible for the small PHA blend. The other thing worth noting is, of course, all of this is voluntary. So some PHAs will choose, may choose to use tools within the public housing program to maintain their stock. That continues to always be an option. But we think that these new tools really create a big opportunity for PHAs to make significant improvements to these assets. Okay, enough with this slide. Before we wrap up, I want to make one last pitch, which is this is really an unprecedented time for the public housing program in terms of the tools available and a great financing environment. So we've talked about the Rad Section 18 blends and the other tools like streamlined voluntary conversion and the expansion of some of the Section 18 eligibility criteria that have become available to PHAs over the last few years, which is really, really significant. But then along with that, the 2020 RAD rents are very, very strong, where over 40% of the public housing stock has rents that are near or above market rent levels. So it's essentially stronger than what might be possible under the normal Section program. Meanwhile, the financing environment is very good. In the latest COVID relief package, Congress fixed the 4% low-income housing tax credit rate. It had been a floating rate before, and I think as of December, the last month that it floated, it was at 3.1%. And now it's fixed at 4%, which means the equity that's raised in 4% tax credit transactions is about 30% greater than it used to be, bringing significantly new capital to preserve or redevelop public housing assets. And then lastly, mortgage interest rates are at historic lows. So money, rent revenue can go further in terms of leveraging FHA insured or conventional first mortgage debt. So all put together, this is making out to be a banner year for an era for opportunities for PHAs to substantially improve public housing assets.
All right, thanks so much, Jane and Will, for that, and thanks to all of our participants for hanging with us for some technical difficulties. Before we tackle all of the great questions that y'all have been sending in the chat box, I just want to first flag a few upcoming trainings and resources that are going to be coming out shortly. So as you see here first, soon HUD will be releasing a RAD Section 18 FAQ, which will likely be informed by some of the questions that you all asked today. Once it's ready, it'll be posted on the repositioning webpage, which is linked here in the PowerPoint. And also upcoming, beginning March 3rd, we will be conducting a series of regional network repositioning convenings for PHAs that will provide an overview of the various repositioning strategies, while also highlighting these new blend options. The convenings will be split up by network and again by PHA size. So for example, for the Southeast Network, there will be 3 separate convenings, one for medium-large housing authorities, one for small, and one for very small. The network reps from each region will be sending registration information to all PHAs. And if you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out, and I can put you in touch with the person who is sending out the registration link. And then last but certainly not least, in the next few weeks, we'll be releasing 3 guides to repositioning public housing, similarly split by PHA size. There'll be one for medium-large PHAs, one for small PHAs, and one for very small PHAs. These will also be posted on the repositioning webpage. So just keep an eye out for those things. And I think if there's nothing else from you, Will and Jane, we can just dive right into the questions.
That's great. Thanks, Kayla. Yeah.
Okay. So let's do it. So there's a lot here, and I'm hoping, we have about an hour left in our time slot, so I'm hoping we can get to all of them. But if not, these will likely be covered in the FAQ, and like I said, we'll take a look at all your questions in developing that FAQ. So next question. We hope to convert all remaining public housing units to TPV under streamlined voluntary conversion. Do the new rules remove or change that option?
No, the streamlined voluntary conversion is still available, but know that under the blends, your reserves can come through, and also under the blend, any over-income residents are also protected as better resident rights. So those should be weighed heavily against, just that little extra 20% in the voucher rent, and see what makes most sense. Again, it's up to
and you would, and it's not necessary to go through and it's not necessary to go through a consent process to project base if that's the goal of the PHA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't need tenant consent. You need tenant consent for streamlined voluntary conversion, not for the blends.
Awesome. The next question, are the units converted under Section 18 eligible for Ddtf? If so, can the anticipated Ddtf be used to increase the RAD rents?
Yeah, as long as the Section 18 occurs prior to the RAD conversion and they're eligible for Ddtf, once those units have been removed from PIC, they are the Ddtf can be calculated and can be used to augment the RAD rents per rent flexibility in the RAD notice.
Yeah, it's my understanding that if you're intermixing RAD and Section 18 in one building, I thought that you did not qualify, at least for ARF. I don't know about Ddtf. You have to have standalone buildings to get ARF under Section 18.
Okay, great, thank you. If a PHA already has a regular RAD chap, can they transfer to one of these options?
Yes. So you should talk to us as soon as you can. We've got if you just have a chap and you haven't submitted your financing plan, that's good, and you can. It's no problem to switch gears. We wouldn't be revising your chap until the financing plan anyway. So you can just make sure that you are taking the necessary steps to satisfy the Section 18 requirements, which are outlined in the older FAQs, which are still posted, such as the consultation with the local government and other unique Section 18 requirements that aren't already, that don't overlap with that requirements. So that's not a problem.
Okay, great. In regard to the 250 or fewer item, can the repositioning plan include removing the rest of your public housing units, Faircloth units, under a 9% tax credit project?
So the 9% tax credits aren't a tool to remove units from public housing itself. So what we'd expect to see is a proposal that says, this property will be approved we expect to take this property, the scattered site units through Section 18. We expect to take this property through a Rad Section 18 blend. We expect to take this property, through just a straight Rad conversion, or whatever it might be. If the question is, could the reposition plan say this will be a Rad conversion using 9% tax credits, and will we accept it? I think those are going to be, in the case, I think we're going to, will provide some more guidance on what we expect to see in a plan, which is basically a reasonable depiction of, reasonable presentation of how the PHA plans to convert all of its public housing and reposition all of its public housing, and with the board's support and intention behind it. So I think it's possible that it's certainly possible that these plans might include use of a HUD tool with 9% tax credits.
I think what the question is if they have Faircloth authority and they want to build it out using a 9% credit. In other words, today those units don't exist. They're going to build them under Faircloth and then convert them under RAD. Would that still work under the 250? And it sounds to me like that's a matter of unit count. Does the additional Faircloth units increase them over the 250 or not? If you're using the blend to remove the units, those Section 18 units would not qualify for Faircloth. But the others would. If you have it already and you want to build more, that's the bigger question.
So if it's a nuanced question like that, we recommend the person who asked the question just send us an email, provide us a little bit more description, and we can either get on the phone to clarify or respond based on the description you provide.
Awesome. Thanks, both of you. Next question, if your PHA is not in one of the published HCC areas, do you use the closest published city? And for high-cost areas, could those potentially extend beyond the public city, or the published city, excuse me?
Yes, that's correct. You use the city that the published HCC city that is closest to where your project is, and that would apply for the high-cost areas too. Great.
Next, and this one is specifically for you, Will. How does HUD establish financial need to move to the blends? For instance, if there is no deferred fee and the PHA is receiving sales proceeds from acquisition of its property in a 4% transaction, would it still qualify for the blend?
So you qualify for the blend based on the level for the construction blend, based on the rehab and construction costs. So we're not looking at any of the other uses like reserves or seller kickback financing or anything like that, or acquisition costs. We're just looking at construction and rehab costs to assess which tier a transaction would qualify for.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Maybe a follow-up to that if that didn't answer it.
Okay, so if you are a PHA that administers less than 250 vouchers, will we be required to partner with another agency? Are we not allowed to consider the new Pbv units that we would get under this type of conversion as part of the 250?
So indeed, for the small PHA blend, the requirement is to administer the vouchers. You've got to be a PHA with over 250 vouchers, indeed, that's the requirement. We know there are going to be some situations where that's not viable, or maybe there is no other administrator, or there are other good cause that the PHA can present. So, you know, we encourage you to talk with your field office and with HUD about the situation. But yes, the standing requirement is that to administer the vouchers, you have to have 250 units of the voucher ECC before considering not counting the new vouchers you would get through the blend.
Okay, awesome. Can you direct us to the guidance that outlines the ownership requirements for Pbv? A PHA can create and control nonprofit or LLC to serve as a project owner, correct?
That's correct. And indeed, we've HUD last year published a Pbv quick reference guide, or a Rad quick reference guide, which is at least one source in which HUD's provided guidance on the various ownership structures that could exist under project-based vouchers. But others might be aware of other locations where we've had guidance. But at the very least, the Rad Pbv quick reference guide provides helpful information.
Okay, next question. Does the requirement that a PHA with 250 or more HCV can only manage a blends contract apply to current RAD development managing the contract with combined RAD and HCV of over 250?
So for now, it's just for the small closeout blend that they have to have an HCV of over 250. And it doesn't look back as far as I know.
If you've got other project-based vouchers or RAD project-based vouchers already under your ACC, that does get included in the 250.
Okay, great. Seems like there's a lot of questions on that. I'm just trying to find a new one. Okay, here we go. Are there any waivers to the requirement that a PHA has a voucher program of at least 250 vouchers? Does that threshold include state Pbvs that the PHA administers? Similar question, but a little new.
Well, we thought that through. That's a good question.
So I certainly can. Sorry, Gene.
I was going to say, I think that's a question that
I was just going to say,
think through a little more. I don't know that we have a good answer to that one yet. If they have state HVC in their program, I don't know that we've considered that. Not HUD vouchers, but
I think HUD
vouchers.
Consider. I can consider any. PHAs can submit to HUD and for consideration or for waivers. It is within HUD's administrative ability to provide waivers, but HUD has not said kind of put parameters around under these situations. All waivers is the case. Again, PHA can certainly consider it, submit a request for HUD to consider it.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so can you address the issue of projects that trigger both Part 50 and Part 58 ER, i.e. FHA financing, Pbv or home, et cetera? What's the cleanest route to approval?
I should turn to Greg on this. So for example, if your RAD units are converting to PBRA and the Section 18 done in a project-based voucher, or if the property is using FHA or other financing requires Part 50 review, I believe we have a protocol in place where the HUD will do the review for the entire property under Part 50. So you don't have to have two different entities doing duplicative reviews. But if Greg is still on, appreciate if you could clarify or correct whatever I just said.
Yeah, so definitely if it's FHA insurance, that will always trump and will be done under a Part 50. I think on the question if it's just a standard RAD Section 18 blend and the RAD units are going PBRA and the Section 18 units are going Pbv, I just need to look back at our notes, sorry, about whether one Part 50 review will cover for that, but well, let's just say we'll have to get back on that question.
Okay. Thank you. Financially, from a rent perspective, is there an upside for using the RAD Section 18 blend for long-term vacant properties? Specifically one that is not eligible for Tpvs?
No. So if they're not, yeah. Right. If they're not eligible for vouchers, then HUD isn't getting, then the PHA is not getting additional vouchers to project base, and so RAD using RAD gives the authority the ability to preserve all of the assistance and not lose the assistance because some units wouldn't be replaced with vouchers under Section 18.
Okay, great. And just a reminder to the panelists, try to stay on mute if you're not talking, just so that we can avoid any feedback. The next question, now that you've introduced these new blends, I guess from your perspective, what are the reasons a PHA would choose a standard RAD conversion?
So the probably the biggest reason, well, obviously you still have to qualify for the blends, right? So, but the biggest reason is in many cases the RAD rents are going to be just as good, if not better, than the rents possible under project-based vouchers. And so there's no reason to kind of use two programs when one will do. But otherwise, yeah, there are going to be a lot of cases where PHAs who thought, well, maybe I can make this work with RAD alone. We'll use the RAD Section 18 blend and be able to reduce how much gap it needs to put in with its capital funds or to hustle for in the community and state.
Hey, Will. So I think our data shows that the vast majority of public housing projects are currently funded under the public housing program at less than the FMR, but the 2020 RAD rents have sort of lifted all boats, more or less. And so now there's not as great a disparity. It's still quite great in certain markets where the Section 18 Tpv rents would be way higher than the RAD rents, but it's not universal. But I think it still isn't more than the majority of cases, they'd be better off with Section 18 rents than they would RAD rents. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's not a super majority as it used to be, but it's definitely a majority. Just saying, a lot of our housing authorities that participate in RAD are converting into PRA to multifamily Section 8 contract, and would prefer not to, even though there are higher rents available through project-based vouchers, would prefer to have it under a single contract, under a single program, which we can't do today through Section 18. Those vouchers could only result in a project-based voucher contract. It has asked Congress for the authority to be able to turn those voucher funds into a PBRA contract, so that it can all be done under the same platform. But Congress is yet to provide that authority.
The other concern would be vacancies. If you've got long-term vacancies, again, the RAD rents are going to be better than nothing, which is what you get under Section 18.
Okay, thank you. Next question. So we have a site divided during asset management. Approximately half the site converted to RAD, 125 units, and half is approved for demo, 143 units. We'd like to bring the two together and demolish and rebuild the 268 blended units. Is that possible?
I think in this situation, these are units that are already converted to RAD, so that you've got an existing RAD HAB contract at 125 units, and then you've got, sounds like there's another 143 that are approved under Section 18 demolition, and you're trying to demolish and rebuild the whole thing together. This is likely possible. I think this is, or the person who asked this question, it would be helpful to probably have a separate conversation about the scope of what you're and details of what you're proposing, and we can.
Hey, Will, even
find a way.
That may be beneficial for this PHA to ask for what we call our repositioning panel calls or whatever, where PHAs can send into the repositioning mailbox a request to have a joint call with the RAD office and the SAC office and the local field office, and just chat through that. And prior to that call, the PHA can essentially draw a map, with crayons. It'd be fine, just showing what the site looks like and what your plans are. And usually when we have the three offices on the same call at the same time with a little background information, we can get you to where you want to go. So, or at least make sure you're on you maximize your options that are available. So I really suggest that you sort of request one of those repositioning panel calls for that site.
Okay, thanks all. So next question, under the Rad Section 18 blend for small PHAs, can PHAs contribute all their public housing funds to the transaction or only in proportion to the RAD component?
So this is an area where we're trying to finalize our guidance, so stay tuned, and we plan to address this in the FAQ. But certainly there's a way, and whether it's a simple way or a little bit roundabout way, there should be a path forward. But again, stay tuned.
Okay, thanks. Just a quick question related to Greg's plugs for the repositioning panel calls. If a PHA had a call prior to the release of the new RAD 2020 rents, do you think that they should reschedule another call?
If they feel that it sort of changes the game plan, if the RAD rents just simply make the deal more feasible, there may not be any need for a call. But if it somehow changes the dynamics of what they were proposing to do, or maybe they were going to go Section 18 and now the RAD rents are better or something, yeah, I mean, there's no a hard line about when you can or can't ask for a call. If you're stuck, give us a ring. But or if you want to, before you even do the call, shoot Jane, me, or Will, or someone an email, and we may be able to resolve it quickly through an email as well.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Greg. So next question, can you clarify if the environmental compliance requirement is Part 58 or Part 50? And follow-up, is Radon required per the new map guide?
Hey, so yes, I just got a chat message from one of my team, my branch chiefs, just confirming that if you're in a blend transaction and the RAD units are going PBRA and the blended units are going Pbv, then we'll do one Part 50 review for the entire site. That's different if the transaction is also involving any CDBG funds or home funds. That's a little bit more complicated, and we have to coordinate with those respective offices of CPD. But if it's a standard blend, we'll do it under, and if the RAD units are our PBRAs, we'll do it under on one review under Part 50. Radon was not initially a requirement under RAD environmental reviews or under RAD, but we do all our environmental reviews consistent. The Part 50s we do them consistent with the MAP guide, and the MAP guide has recently been updated for, as I remember, for Radon. So now Radon is now a requirement for all environmental reviews under RAD.
Okay, thanks. Another Faircloth question, just to clarify: if a small PHA chooses the Rad Section 18 construction blend, will they lose their remaining Faircloth?
Yeah, the PHA would lose its ability to develop those units under Faircloth. As it's closing out, the PIH has a separate notice on closing out, which is, basically two options. You wind down your public housing program piece by piece, or you can consolidate the program into another PHA's program, in which case any remaining Faircloth you have would transfer as well. Yes, the simple answer is that the PHA, oh, go ahead.
Well, sorry, this is Kathy. I was just going to say, under the construction blend, for the Section 18 units, the housing authority will retain its Faircloth because there's no closeout requirement there under either option. So I think the housing authority could develop new units under Faircloth from the Section 18 units in a construction blend. If that was
thank you so much, Kathy. I missed that detail. Right, so the construction blend doesn't have any impact on the PHA's Faircloth or ability to develop its Faircloth units, but the small PHA blend does require the PHA not develop any more Faircloth units. Thanks, Kathy.
Okay. I'm hearing that we're all good for the next question. So this is a question about the Pbvs remaining at a property forever, like a RAD unit. As I recall, HOTMA, I think, says that the 20-year HAP contract can be renewed, but it applies only for a maximum of 40 years total. Can you clarify?
No, would you mind repeating that? You broke up a little bit.
Sure. So this is a question about Pbvs remaining at a property forever, like a RAD unit. As I recall, HOTMA, I think, says a 20-year HAP can be renewed, but it implies only for a maximum of 40 years total. Please clarify.
Right, so in a blend, the use agreement remains on the site, or is placed on the site. That use agreement is essentially there in perpetuity. The non-RAD Pbv HAP contract is executed and can be extended right away up to 40 years, and then can't be extended again until you get to the 40-year mark. So. And maybe you can correct me if I got this wrong, but it's not that a PHA is not allowed to extend it beyond 40 years. It's that they can't extend it beyond 40 until the contract approaches the end of that term. Okay,
thank you. The next question. Will there be any additional options developed for PHA-only organizations? Are resources for PHA-only who are not fluent in the differences in pricing between Pbvs, HCVs, et cetera?
Yeah, so for if you're public housing, oh, go ahead, Jane.
I was going to say I'd recommend that the person who asked that question get in touch with their field office and set up a panel call.
I'll make a pitch to say that sometimes PHAs say, well, I don't have a voucher program and all this relies on vouchers, so I'm this isn't for me, but through our experiences with RAD, I mean, Section 18 over the last few years, we discovered some of the happiest PHAs are those that have converted essentially to project-based vouchers. Another housing authority has administered the vouchers, done all the tenant certs and the subsidy payments and things like that. And the PHA continues to own and manage the property. The PHA just focuses on its strengths, owning and managing real estate. Somebody else does the work on tenant certs. And the fact that they don't have a voucher program themselves doesn't make any difference. They're no longer reports to HUD relations that have a contract with the customer who's being the administrator. So those have been some of our happiest last years, and so it is a model that I strongly recommend for housing authorities.
So Will, you were breaking up again a little bit, so I'm just going to go on to the next question and hope that it fixes itself, and then remind all my other panelists to mute themselves when they're not talking, so that's not part of the issue. The next question, with a small PHA blend, do residents still have a mobility option with their voucher after 1 year?
So they do, I mean,
yes, the standard, both in RAD.
That's a standard feature within the PHA the voucher program, but the only time the housing authority is required to pay for the move is when they are being the first conversion, when they're leaving public housing. So.
Okay.
But up until, but any time after that, they have the ability to request a voucher. Whether or not the PHA has one available is the question.
Okay, thanks. With the new blend option, it is likely that more Tpvs will be needed. Does HUD request an estimated amount of Tpvs for each year?
We do, and we'll be monitoring that closely. We have not yet used all of our Tpvs in any given year, so if we begin to get close to that, we will go back to Congress. But so far, we haven't reached that level yet.
Awesome, thanks. So next, is there a pros and cons chart of the repositioning tools, particularly for very small PHAs?
We do have a
so there's
chart. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that there's a really wonderful guide that we're going to be putting out for very small PHAs, one for small and another for small PHAs. That's not too dense, but thorough enough for a PHA to help weigh its options and understand kind of what are the what are the pros and cons of each option and all that. And the other thing is as you develop questions or are just starting out trying to think about what are the options and what are the implications, you can request a repositioning panel call for your field office, which have been great resources for PHAs to vet different approaches and understand the implications.
Okay, awesome. So for the small PHA blend, does the capital needs assessment need to be done to the RAD standard for the entire portfolio?
So again, the analysis will be on the project level, but yes, if your project is going through a RAD Section 18 blend, the capital needs assessment would cover the entire project. There should be one set of environmental reports covering the entire project. HUD will be, just as we do today in any RAD conversion that has RAD and non-RAD units, we'll be looking at the property as a whole, and its operating pro forma and its sources and uses.
Okay. The next question. Oh. With the program blending at the new level, would a PHA not be able to capture Section 8 rents but use a RAD HAP contract at the higher rent schedule and eliminate converting to vouchers and have to introduce another HCV administrator into the mix?
So there's some very pleasant music playing in the background.
I found it. I muted him.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure I fully understand the question, so I suspect it might need to be kind of submitted to us through email, hopefully with a little bit more detail.
Okay, thank you. This webinar keeps staying interesting with audio, so thanks everybody for your patience. The next question, another one about HCC. So I have a question about the HCC threshold for projects combining different types of buildings. Our organization is working on a project that has a combination of walk-up buildings and elevator buildings. Would the HCC threshold on construction costs be calculated based on weighted average HCC for the project as a whole, or would you evaluate the hard cost versus HCC threshold building by building?
So you look at it as a whole. And the worksheet, the workbook that we published on the RAD resource desk allows you to put in the units of each building type. So you can say it's 52 bedroom units in a walk up and a separate 30 unit elevator structure of 1 bedroom units, and it'll consider it all together. But yes, again, the analysis will be entire project, not broken down building by building.
Okay, great. So next, if a PHA is eligible to do a 40-60 split, where does the PHA get the money to fund the 60% Section 18 rents? Does this limit the amount of Tpvs the authority can issue?
So if a PHA requests new voucher funding from HUD, they're called tenant protection vouchers, but it's essentially a new allotment of voucher funding, new voucher ECC units and money to go along with it, that the PHA that adds to the voucher to the agency's a voucher pot, and which it can use to make payments under the HAP contract.
Okay, are you ready for the next one? Under a blend program, the Section 18 units have to be in a separate building from the RAD units. Is that correct?
They don't have to be, but if they are, they can be eligible for ARF and Ddtf, I think. If they're in one building and it's all together, then they would not qualify for ARF at least.
Right, so just to clarify, so there's nothing that says when you do a blend that the units, the RAD units and the Section 18 units have to be in different buildings. The only thing that Jane was modifying was to say the Section 18 program allows generally for units to be eligible for asset repositioning fee, ARF, and Ddtf, demolition, disposition, transition funding. But that's only if the Section 18 units are in separate buildings. So if you had a high-rise where you were doing a RAD Section 18 blend, you could do the blend, but you wouldn't be eligible for any Ddtf funds.
and just to modify that, you wouldn't be eligible for asset repositioning fee under the operating fund. You actually would be eligible for Ddtf under the capital fund, but that's not it's a very minor detail. It's very common under blends for it to be blended within a specific building.
Okay, thanks. Is there a way for PHAs to understand what factors went into the determination of the HCC for a particular jurisdiction?
So those are tables published by HUD's Policy Development and Research arm based on RS means data. So those are basically handed to us as the amounts across the country. We know there have been a number of jurisdictions that have said, hey, cost an arm and a leg to build around here. How come I'm not a high-cost city? And that's and only because we had to create a cutoff, and the cutoff we created was those where their HCCs were 120% above the national average in those tables. And so even high cities where it's certainly expensive to build in, whether Los Angeles or Washington D.C. or other places, didn't necessarily make the cut because of the way because of the threshold we created.
All right, thanks. So if a PHA is using Section 18 to dispose of scattered site units, can they project base the vouchers there and sell them to third parties? I thought I heard that in order to project base, the PHA needed to maintain control.
So they can put a project base. They can put it into a project-based unit, but if they do, all the voucher, the housing choice voucher rules would apply. So they'd have to do it competitively. They have to abide by the income caps for the program and for the building. So it can be done, but it's just unless it's a related party to the housing authority.
Just also to add that RAD's the only sort of removal program that has this ongoing sort of tale about public ownership or control. So if it was a RAD conversion, yeah, you'd have to prove that it was public ownership, public or nonprofit ownership or control. Section 18 is not worried about the type of organization that owns the property, only that it has to be disposed. So you either dispose for fair market value or you dispose for commensurate public benefit, in which case most PHAs, when they do that, commensurate public benefit usually means for low-income housing, that the PHA often disposes it to a nonprofit arm of the PHA. So in the case of the Section 18 scattered sites that the question was referring to, then yes, there has to be a disposition, but under Section 18, it doesn't have to still be publicly owned or controlled, but it often is, that most PHAs do transfer it to some nonprofit arm. They're not required to, but they often do for a nominal value in order to maintain it as low-income housing.
Okay, great, thanks. So next question, when adjusting annually for Ocaf, does the Ocaf adjustment apply to all tenants on the half anniversary date or to each tenant on their lease anniversary date?
So the Ocaf rent doesn't apply, excuse me, the Ocaf does not refer to changes in the tenant's rent. Tenant's rent follows standard Section 8 rules where they pay 30% of adjusted income. The Ocaf applies to the Section 8 contract rent, the amount in the contract that determines how much HUD pays or how much HAP is paid, HAP subsidy is paid, when subtracting the tenant rents, 30% of income, tenant rents, so minus the contract rent. That's the HUD subsidy. So the contract rent is adjusted by Ocaf for the term of contract, not the tenant rent.
Okay, awesome. Can PHAs that use a HUD-approved alternative TDC use those TDC and HCC costs for calculating construction blend eligibility rather than the published TDC, HCC for that jurisdiction?
No, we're just using the standard HCC tables that are published by HUD.
Okay, great. Does the Office of Recap provide referrals for consultants?
We do not. But there's certainly lots of very good consultants and folks out there that can help PHAs kind of build capacity. We frequently see PHAs do put out solicitations and get a bunch of responses and to help vet who could be most beneficial to the agency.
Great, thank you. In a blend, are the income precautions extended to the resident? Actually, I think maybe I'll need that person to send in that question again because now that I'm reading it, I don't quite understand it. So I'll just move to the next one. Can you clarify if the small PHA Rad Section 18 blend can only be used on one of the PHA's projects, or can the blend be used on several projects that are financed separately and the 80-20 split can be applied to the total number of units in those multiple projects, all within the PHA's portfolio?
They can do multiple projects, but the total number has to be 250 or less of multiple projects. So they could do, you know, if there's, let's say they have 3 sites, 150 unit, 175 unit, and 140 unit. They could do each of those sites as part of the blend, but the total can't be more than 250.
Right, and just to add, and we'll chime in here, but project is converting project as defined by RAD, not necessarily AMP or how projects are referred to in IMS PIC. So you can combine units in different AMPs and PIC numbers as long as it's part of the same converting project under RAD.
Okay, thanks all of you. If a RAD unit becomes vacant and remains vacant long-term, does the unit remain on the RAD HAP contract, or would it have to be removed?
So under RAD, the unit should remain. We should probably get back to the questioner with a little bit more detail here. But the short answer is that units should not be removed from the RAD HAP contract without HUD's prior approval.
Okay, thanks. Next question, if the AMP that you plan on doing a blend execution with has 2 and 1 bedrooms, how do you select which units are the TPV units? Can the PHA select the 2-bedroom units to maximize income?
Yes, it's up to the PHA to select which units it would choose under RAD or Section 18. One of the things that they provide in the financing plan is a listing by unit of which ones would be RAD and which ones are Section 18, so that HUD can separate up units in the different applications. But it's up to the PHA.
Okay, next question. In a blend, are the income protections extended to the residents who are housed in a TPV unit?
The resident rights are, yes. So the right to return.
When you say that,
no pre-screening, but
all residents are under the Section 8 program, and so have tenant rents governed by the Section 8 rules. Again, they'll be paying 30% of adjusted income. The only thing that differs in RAD and that applies in the blends is that if say public housing residents are on flat rents prior to conversion and are eligible for the tenant rent phase-in, which allows the rent to be phased up to the Section 8 rent or to the standard 30% of adjusted income rent. That does apply for both the RAD and the Section 18 units, or the residents of the entire property, regardless of whether the units were removed through RAD or Section 18.
Okay, thanks. So we got about 20 minutes left and a good 4 or 5 questions left, so we'll keep chugging along. Thanks everybody for all your great questions. So next one, if you do a blend, do you have to select the actual unit, or do you select so many 1s and 2s, et cetera, bedroom units?
We want you to select the actual units. Instead, and this is part of how we are trying to make things easier for folks and give you the maximum flexibility. So rather than have you go in and submit a separate Section 18 application that you try to align with the RAD application, you give us all the materials through RAD in the financing plan, including this listing of units that are going through RAD, which ones you want through RAD, and which ones you want through Section 18. And then with those materials, how to create your Section 18 package, your application. Yes, we want a breakdown of unit addresses and which ones are RAD, which ones are Section 18.
Okay, great. So when using the RAD small PHA blend, must the PHA have 250 vouchers before the blend or after the blend?
Before the blend, like the 250, you have to be 250 or fewer right now in PIC and IMS PIC in order to submit for any or all of those units under a RAD Section 18 small PHA blend.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Next question, for our Tpvs generated through the blend, we can set our rents at FMR exception standards if applicable. Also, in the case of Tpvs with transfer of assistance, will our rents be set at the originating or new zip code?
So the rents that will apply to the non-RAD project-based voucher contract are set based on the project-based voucher program. So that is determined by the reasonable rent and the FMRs for the condition and location of where the project is located. Further, I'm not 100% familiar with small area FMRs, but I believe a PHA would use small area FMRs if they've adopted the use of small area FMRs for their project-based voucher program as a whole. But that's something we can check on and confirm on for you. But the short rule of thumb is you would follow you follow the standard project-based voucher rules for establishing the contract rents. If you've adopted smaller FMRs, and they are applicable to your project-based voucher program, then they would apply.
Okay, thanks. So I have someone who's interested in asking their question verbally, so I'll go ahead and unmute your line, Naomi.
This is Naomi. Hi, how's everyone doing? On the blends, and I apologize if this got asked earlier and I missed it, but can the blends be used for transfers of assistance, specifically transfers of assistance from one converting site to multiple new sites? So for example, if I have a converting site with 100 public housing units and I'm doing a transfer of assistance, 30 units into site A and 70 units into site B, and the new construction cost for each of those replacement units is 75% of HUD's HCC. Can I use the blend across each property? So could I do 60% of my TOAs into project A with RAD rents and then 40% with Section 18 rents and same with project B? Or are you looking at the blends only if you're doing a convert in place?
So the blend and a transfer of assistance.
Hey.
The blends apply for transfers of assistance, but we look at it at the transaction level. So if you've got 100 units and you're going to send it to 2 different locations, 50 units and 50 units, and we're looking at the first 50 unit transaction as a standalone, on its own for eligibility. Does it meet a construction threshold, et cetera? And then the second transfer for eligibility. So it's possible that you're transferring assistance to 2 sites, and one is a new construction and it'll qualify, and the other is a recently built property that that they're transferring assistance to, and it won't qualify.
Okay, and follow up to that then. If that site A, new construction site, and you're transferring 50 units of public housing RAD into it, but the 50 units is less than 25% of the total number of units, maybe there's light tech, maybe there's other workforce housing that's not financed through 4%, are you looking at, would that disqualify? Do you have to meet that, I think it's 25% threshold of the units have to be RAD units, or would you still be able to use the blend since you're doing 100% of the converting project? Yeah, okay, so let's not use 50 units, but let's say you have 20 units of RAD, 20 units of public housing that you're converting through a RAD TOA, but they're going into a site that has 100 units total. So the RAD units will only comprise 20% of the new constructed site. Can I still use the blend on those 20 RAD converting units, even though they make up 20% of the new site? Because there's language within the notice that specifies that you have to meet a certain threshold for the number of units as a converting project in order to be able to utilize the blend.
So the in the first case, the converting project is the 20 units, and the covered project where the assistance is going is the 100 units. And so the 20 units would qualify for the blend. So we might end up being 60-40 or something like that, Rad Section 18. When we're looking at construction costs, we're looking at the construction costs for the full covered project, for the full 100 units in which those 20 units are going to land.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Yep, thanks. Thanks all of you. We just have a few more. Hopefully we can get through them all. How do the RAD and Pbv hats differ? Why can't a PHA only get one hat?
So the 2 hat tracks have so in a Rad Section 18 blend, you end up, that's an important point, that you end up with two contracts. You end up with a Rad HAP contract, whether Pbv or Pbra, and a standard project-based voucher HAP contract. And even if it were Rad project-based vouchers and regular project-based vouchers, those contracts differ. They have different terms that apply to them. So, for example, under Rad, you can get rehab assistance payments. And there's different language about how funding flows, right? The main purpose of a HAP contract, and one of the main purposes of a HAP contract is to tell the owner how they're going to get paid. And the funding flows differently under Rad versus in a regular project-based voucher contract. So there are enough differences that the contract can't just be merged into a single form.
Okay, thanks, Will. After closing, are there operational differences between Rad units and Section 18 units when using the blend?
For the most part, no. Obviously, the substance calculations will differ. They'll have two different schedules and HAP contracts that the housing authority contract will be paying from, but tenants will be under the same leases and have the same rights. All the same reporting requirements will apply. So there's no difference there. Of course, there are situations where PHAs are rare, but PHAs are converting the RAD units to Pbra, and then the Section 18 units are, of course, going to project-based vouchers. In which case, there are some differing requirements that PHAs owners need to be familiar with, but outside of that context, the requirements are basically the same.
Okay, thanks. So I had another question that I thought might be good to save for closer to the end. Can you walk through how a conversion might look for a less than 250 unit PHA, assuming the units meet HQS? Could it convert all of the units, including the Rad Pbv units, tomorrow and implement a rehab strategy over time?
So under the small PHA blends, that the PHA is still taking each project through a RAD conversion, which means a capital needs assessment to identify what short and long-term needs the property has, environmental review, all that, and which might identify necessary mitigation. It would need to, even though units might pass HQS, might then be required to address capital repairs as part of the conversion itself. So it's not an automatic, okay, the units meet HQS, we'll convert you tomorrow or next month, and do work on the property as just on its own schedule. So the doing that due diligence, getting the capital needs assessment will take some time. Of course, the property might not need any capital repairs at this time, and so could convert pretty quickly based on the finding of the capital needs assessment. And then later on, as the property ages, do some more work or recapitalize the property at a later time.
And just to add, that would be different if the PHA had 50 or fewer units, because whether you convert it under Section 18, 50 or fewer, there's no financing plan required to be eligible for Section 18, or under RAD, where we waive the physical needs assessment for PHAs 50 and under, and you're not even, we don't even allow you to do repairs as part of conversion. We just want to make it a real simple conversion. It's really a paperwork transaction. But if you go through, as Will said, the small PHA blend, then you're really, you're preserving the property. And to preserve the property, we while we're going to give you vouchers to Section 8 authority to get tenant corrective vouchers, we want to also see that the asset, that the physical needs are being addressed, and that therefore we do need to receive a capital needs assessment for the property.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Thanks, Will. Next question: if you have available units under the Faircloth limit, can a PHA place public housing units on a non-public housing property and then convert the units to RAD?
So if the question is, can you develop public housing units under Faircloth and then convert them to RAD, the answer is yes, unless I'm missing something in that question.
Okay. Do you want me to read it again, Kathy?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. If you have available units under the Faircloth limit, can a PHA place public housing units on a non-public housing property and then convert the units to RAD?
Yeah, I mean, you could develop units under Faircloth authority on a property that is currently not a public housing property. You could do that through an acquisition proposal if they're existing units that you just want to acquire and then bring under public housing based on Faircloth. So yeah, I mean, you could acquire new property with or without existing units, bring them under public housing under Faircloth authority, and then convert those units to RAD.
Yeah, there's something called the 905 process or 906 process that you have to go through to bring them into public housing and then convert them.
Right,
So
you would have to bring them. Right, you'd have to bring them in under a 905 acquisition or development proposal, mixed finance or conventional.
Awesome. So this is a follow-up on a previous question. Can a PHA apply the small PHA Rad Section 18 blend across multiple projects if each project is a separate Rad Section 18 project with separate financing?
I don't hear Will, so I'll step in. So yeah, the Rad Section 18 blend doesn't require you to, if you have 240 units, to do it all under one transaction. You can do it under separate transactions, and every one you've got to essentially, we'll do it sort of pay as you go. If you do a 50-unit project, the first site for 50 units, then it's going to be a RAD transaction of 10 RAD units and 40 Section 18 units. And if the next site is 100 units, then there'll be 20 RAD and 80 Section 18. So yeah, each one of them can be broken up into different transactions.
Right, and the important thing again to keep in mind is we're going by the converting project definition in RAD, not by AMP or PIC number for each development. So you can combine multiple units, multiple projects, multiple AMPs as part of a converting project as defined by RAD under one financing package.
Okay, thanks. Another follow-up, if you do add units to public housing under Faircloth, do you need to have them added as public housing before applying for RAD?
Yes, yes. There's no streamlined way to develop units that will immediately be RAD units. You have to develop them as public housing under 905 and then convert them through the RAD process. My understanding, Will, Greg chime in here, is that HUD is looking into kind of a streamlined process for that, but as of right now, it's two separate processes. Yeah,
so we're both looking at a streamlined process, but also to find a way for PHAs to have the equivalent of sort of like a preliminary application for if you're interested in building Faircloth and then immediately flipping it into a RAD transaction. And we still got more work to do with that, but we may have some literature to share with PHAs within a few weeks. So just stay tuned.
Okay, thanks. And I think this will be the last one. I hope that I got to everybody's questions, and if not, please send follow-ups, and we will get back to you as we can. So last one. Has there been any further renewed discussions on HUD's ability to combine a RAD PBRA HAP with a Section 18 blend Pbv HAP contract now that this great tool continues to expand in an effort to not have two separate HAP contracts on one project that need to be managed each under multifamily and PIH?
Yeah, right now we can't do it. There's the sort of statutory sort of impediments for us to create one blended HAP contract or just one HAP contract. So under a blend, you're still going to have a RAD HAP and you're going to have a Section 8 HAP, a non-RAD Section 8 HAP, but we continue to look for ways in which we can sort of get to one place sometime down the road, but it's going to require legislation.
All right, thanks, Greg. And I think with that we'll close it out. We're right at the top of the hour at 3 o'clock Eastern. Appreciate everybody's time today and all the folks from HUD who were on to share their knowledge. Jane or Will, I'm not sure if you have any closing statements.
I want to thank everybody, and if you've got more questions, please send them in. We're trying to put as much guidance out as we can. So the more questions we get, the better we can do with that.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Again, please strongly encourage folks to look at these tools and give a fresh look to the public housing stock that hopefully can be preserved and improved through what we're trying to make available here.
Great, thanks. And for all the participants, I know I got a few people in the chat letting me know that they didn't ever get their presentation. So just like I said, please send me an email and I can send it to you. If not, it will be posted on HUD Exchange along with a recording in the next few weeks. So with that, we'll close it out, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Kayla. Thanks, Will.